When I was a kid, the attic always scared me more than the basement did. I don't really know why. Most people are more afraid of basements, but there was something about our attic that really got to me. If I had to guess, I'd say it was because our attic was slightly unconventional compared to what you're probably picturing. For starters, it was surprisingly spacious. Most attics are typically cramped and congested, which makes sense. But our attic was built in such a way that you didn't ever have to crouch when you were up there. You might think that would imply we used it more often, the same way anyone would use excess space. But no. I'm not really sure why, but my parents treated it like a glorified storage room. That was its sole purpose. Thinking about it now, they honestly avoided it as much as possible. The other thing about it was that it had so many nooks and crannies built into it. What I mean by that is the space was broken up by odd beams and small changes in elevation, almost like a makeshift maze. The beams were of uneven thickness, and there was no pattern to where they appeared. The result was that you couldn't stand in any one place up there and have a clear line of sight from one end to the other, and the uneven flooring was a nightmare. You could genuinely injure yourself up there if you weren't careful. My dad used to joke that one day one of us would slip on one of the joists, fall through the insulation, and puncture a hole in the ceiling. So you can imagine why an attic like that would be scary to a little kid. The maze-like quality was what freaked me out the most. I really didn't like not being able to see the attic in its entirety, and every time I went up there, I felt like someone was hiding behind one of the beams. But anyway, what I'm about to tell you happened so long ago that I don't have a ton of other memories from that period in my life. For whatever reason, however, this memory is so vivid that it feels like a thorn protruding into what was otherwise a fantastic childhood. It happened during the week, which I remember because I had school that day. I'm not sure exactly how old I was, but I was in middle school. I woke up one morning and noticed my feet were dirty. The bottoms were gray and grimy, and there was this fine layer of grit between my toes that I couldn't explain. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at them, trying to figure out what had happened. I hadn't gone outside the night before. I hadn't done anything unusual. I'd just gone to bed, fallen asleep, and woken up with filthy feet. Being a little kid and all, I didn't give it too much thought beyond that. I just washed my feet in the bathtub and went about my day. Things only escalated from there, though. A few days later, I found a box in my room that didn't belong there. It was the small cardboard box filled with old photographs, the kind my parents kept stored away in the attic. I had no memory of bringing it downstairs, and when I asked my mom about it, she just assumed I'd been rummaging through the attic for some reason. I told her I hadn't, but she didn't seem concerned. She just took the box back upstairs, and that was that. Then it happened again. I woke up one morning and found an old lamp sitting on my desk. This ugly brass thing that I vaguely recognized from the attic. This time I was sure I definitely hadn't brought that down. I would have remembered carrying a lamp through my house in the middle of the night. But there it was, sitting on my desk like it belonged there. That's when things started clicking into place. The dirty feet, the box of photographs, the lamp. I wasn't just sleepwalking. I was sleepwalking to the attic. The realization didn't scare me right away, but it made me feel strange. The idea that I was unconsciously navigating that maze of beams and uneven flooring in the dark, completely unaware of what I was doing, was weird. I told my parents, and they reacted exactly how you'd expect. They said sleepwalking was completely normal, that lots of kids did it, and that I'd probably grow out of it. I wouldn't exactly say they were dismissive, but they weren't overly concerned either. To them, it was just one of those things. But to me, it was more than that. After the next incident, I started dreading bedtime. I'd lie in bed for hours after I was supposed to go to sleep, fighting it because I was terrified of what might happen once I was unconscious. I obviously couldn't fight sleep forever, though, and every morning, I would frantically check my feet to see if they were dirty. If they were clean, it had been a good night. If they were dirty, it had been a bad night. They were usually clean, but those few times they weren't really got to me. There was no denying that I was definitely going up to the attic regularly, and the worst part about the whole thing was that I had no memory of it whatsoever. For all I knew, I was spending more time up there than in my own bed. The fear I felt during that period was different from anything I had ever experienced. It was like this slow, creeping dread that never went away. It was awful. But nothing was scarier than what I'm about to say. I woke up one morning, only it wasn't morning. It was still dark out. It took me a few seconds to realize it, but I wasn't in my bed either. In fact, I wasn't even lying down. I was standing. That was the first thing I registered. I was standing upright in complete darkness, and I had no idea where I was. For a few seconds, my brain couldn't even process it. But then the recognition hit me. I was in the attic. The fear that washed over me was so intense that I almost couldn't breathe. Attic in the middle of the night in pitch black darkness. I couldn't see a single thing. Not the beams, not the boxes, not the hatch. Nothing. Just absolute impenetrable black. And to make matters worse, I had no idea where in the attic I was. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, too scared to move. It was like sleep paralysis times 100. I knew the layout of the attic, but only vaguely, and only from memory. I also knew there were obstacles everywhere. The idea of trying to find my way back to the hatch in complete darkness was almost unthinkable, but I couldn't just stand there forever. So I started moving, slowly and painfully. I was so scared that I actually started crying, but silently. The tears were just flooding down my face, and I felt like if I made too much noise, something was going to get me. It was the most terrified I've ever been, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone up there. I don't know what was giving me that thought, but I could feel something else there with me. Something further in the dark, and as soon as I had that thought, I actually heard something. There was a soft thud from somewhere behind me. It honestly sounded like a footstep, or someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. I kept moving, but I heard the sound twice more, and both times it sounded like it was coming from a different spot. At that point, I was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was something else up there with me. I don't know how long it took me to find the hatch, but I eventually did find it. I went straight to my parents' room and woke them up. I was full on bawling at that point. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told them what had happened, how I'd had to find my way back in the dark. I told them about the sounds too, and that there was someone in the attic. I expected my dad to spring out of bed and rush up there with a baseball bat, but he didn't. They didn't even really take me seriously. My mom just hugged me and told me it was okay, that sleepwalking could be scary, but it wasn't dangerous. My dad offered to put a lock on the attic hatch if it would make me feel better, and I said yes, obviously. But I knew what I heard. I insisted that they at least check the attic, and my dad finally agreed. As I was watching my dad climb up there was a part of me that genuinely thought he wasn't going to make it back. But not 2 minutes later, he was already climbing back down the ladder. He told me there was nothing up there and to go back to sleep. So that's what I did, but lying in bed after that experience was the worst night of my life. After that, the sleepwalking did stop. I'm not sure what I would have done if it had continued, and speaking of that, I've never been able to fully accept the sleepwalking explanation. I know that's the most logical explanation. Sleepwalking is a real thing that happens to people, and there's nothing supernatural about it. But there's this part of me that can't let it go. The way I always ended up in the same place, the attic, never anywhere else in the house, and the way I was apparently capable of navigating the maze of beams and obstacles in complete darkness without even hurting myself. And most of all, that night I woke up standing in the dark. The sounds I heard. I still believe there was something up there with me, I really do. What it was, I have no idea. I'm obviously a lot older now, and I've brought these concerns up to my parents several times, but they always give me the same dismissive answers. It almost feels like they themselves don't want to think about it, which also doesn't make much sense to me. I doubt I'll ever get the answer I'm looking for. This happened when I was 14 or 15. My family lived in this old house that had been passed down for generations. My dad grew up there, and so did his parents before him. I don't live there anymore, but I still think about what I'm about to tell you from time to time. Like most houses, it had an attic. It was basically a graveyard for stuff nobody wanted to deal with, like old furniture, boxes of God knows what, and Christmas decorations. That last one was the only reason anyone ever went up there. Once a year right before the holidays, and then once more to put everything back. This happened around Christmas time, but Christmas has basically nothing to do with the story. That particular Christmas, My dad decided I was finally old enough to grab the decorations myself. He gave me the whole rundown, which boxes to look for, something about the lights being in a separate container near the back wall, and I nodded along like I was paying attention. I wasn't, not really. I was thinking about something else. We finished talking, and he sent me up to the attic. I climbed the ladder and pulled down the little chain to turn on the light. I remember looking around and thinking I genuinely couldn't remember the last time I'd been up there. But then I realized there was a problem. I had absolutely no idea what my dad had actually told me to grab. I couldn't remember any of his instructions, and there was no way I was going back to ask him to repeat himself. My dad had this thing about that. He'd get legitimately pissed off if you made him say something twice, so I just started opening random boxes that looked like they might contain Christmas decorations.